Hi, my name's James, and this is Bella.
Thank you, James.
And Sarah.
Good morning.
And welcome to the PNC podcast. Today we have a very special guest, SA's own Minister for Education. Please welcome Honourable Minister Gardner.
Hi, how you going?
Thank you for being here. We are so happy that you can take your time out of your day for coming to the PNT studio.
Me too. I'm very glad to be here. It's fantastic.
So, what do you think of our new studio?
I think this is fantastic. We've got this green screen over here, and I've been looking at some of the pictures, and some of your guests or some of your presenters are running with the bulls, some are on the beach, and it made me think we've got our borders opening with Queensland in the not too distant future, and I'd love to go up there for a holiday sometime, but we've got young kids, so that probably won't happen for a long time.
So if you were to stand there, what would you want your background to be?
I think that I would have as my background something really special, like the Eiffel Tower or maybe the Congress in America, and just something to remind us that we're part of a big world and we might not be visiting anywhere overseas in the near future, but we need to stay connected with the world as people.
Are you planning to go there when all this is over?
Not anytime soon. I think that we do have this extraordinary situation we're in at the moment, and one of the things that it reminds us is what a lucky people we are to be here in Australia, and the wonderful things that we can do here in South Australia too. So I think that all of my holidays and my family's holidays in the next year or two are going to be in South Australia, and we may get into state at some stage, but there's plenty to do here.
Could you start by telling us what your job entails as Minister for Education?
So, as Minister for Education, I have responsibility for policy decisions related to all of our schools in South Australia. So we have 500 public schools and 400 public preschools. We've got about 2,000 TAFE staff and working across about 40 TAFE campuses. And of course, the decisions that we make work with the government to make sure that we've got the right funding mix and the right policies to support our schools in the work they do. So across South Australia, there's nearly 300,000 students in our schools,
Wow.
45,000 teachers, and
Wow.
that's an enormous responsibility to ensure that they are supported to give you guys the best possible start in life. And look, every day is a bit different. I get to spend some of my days in long meetings, back to back, from beginning to end, in the same building, sometimes even in the same room, as we work through what policy decisions we need to make. The best days are when I get to go out and visit schools and talk with principals and staff, and most importantly, students, and find out how things are going and the impacts of the decisions we're making.
So when you were going out to travel to other schools, was there a moment where you really specifically remember, like a really distinct moment?
I think one of the really key things that strikes me is when you see students achieving who didn't necessarily get a concept before. So when students have talked about the things that they've achieved or the things that they've learnt over the course of the year, usually you get met by leaders of the school, the prefects if it's in a high school, or the SRC, and sometimes they'll talk about the things they want to do in life next year. Like last week I was at a school where I was met by a young man who wants to be an electrician and a young woman who wants to be a pilot, and she was a bit nervous about her career because of course there's not that many flights going at the moment, but we're able to talk to her about in 3 or 4 years' time, by the time she gets her pilot's license, there will be. And I think that one of the real joys in my life is that when you're talking to students your age, or even a little bit older, you're starting to think about the world that you're going to create. And as somebody who has great joy in thinking about what that world is going to be, I get confidence. I think talking to students all the time, I get such great confidence in the world that you guys are going to create. I find young people to be optimistic and not cynical. I find young people to be interested and curious, and that is so important. And I find young people to, by and large, be very compassionate, and I think that that's really important in life. I think that kindness is the greatest virtue that you can have, and I see success. I see the role of government and education and schools as to giving young people the support they need to have a successful life. And being successful in life, it means different things to every single person. Fundamentally, it means that you get to wake up in the morning and look forward to the day you've got ahead of you, because the job that you're doing or the family situation you're in is something that you enjoy doing. And the schooling system can help you find that.
Wow, Mr. Gardner, you really got the answer.
We've got 20 minutes before the cameras blow up, so I've got to be shorter in future.
So at our school, we learn through personal investigations, inquiries, and embedded STEM practices. How important do you think STEM skills and innovations are for schools and for the future?
Look, it's really important. There are some things that the future we don't know about, and having the capacity to understand different technologies but also different capabilities will give you guys the opportunity to adapt to that uncertain future. But there's other things that we really do know about the future. We know in South Australia that there's going to be $90 billion worth of defence projects, for example, that we'll be building, and thousands and thousands of young South Australians are going to be able to work on those jobs. We know in South Australia that we've just had the Australian Space Agency be established on North Terrace, on Lot 14, alongside the Smart Satellite Collaborative Research Centre and the Launch Control. And we know that there are satellite launch facilities being potentially built here in South Australia. South Australia is going to be the space state for all of Australia, and it's one of the fastest growing industries in the world. We also know that cybersecurity is one of the fastest growing industries in the IT sector. And cyber, space and defence, South Australia is going to be the hub where most of those jobs are in the future. So for young South Australians thinking about the sorts of jobs they might like, if you're interested in cyber and IT, or if you're interested in ships and defence, or if you're interested in space, and who isn't, then there are so many jobs that are going to be there in South Australia, and having that STEM learning in our primary schools and high quality maths and science learning in our high schools is absolutely critical to giving you guys the tools you need if that's something you want to do.
I think everybody would like that, because especially like how everything's going on, space exploration and all that is going to be really important.
And it's one of the funny things is that it's not just about computer programming and designing and building spaceships and things like that. The space industry is very broad. It's going to need creative people. It's going to need lawyers. It's going to need designers. It's going to need people who are writers. It's going to need people who are in the building industry to create a range of these opportunities in space and defence. But there's a lot of IT and tech stuff that's pretty exciting too.
I'm a Minister for Building School Communities, and we go around seeking perspectives from the community to try to improve our school. So do you think we need to work and talk with people before we make important decisions?
Yeah, look, absolutely. And that's the way that governments work well, when you have a strong amount of communication between the community and the people who are in government. It doesn't mean that every single decision needs to go out to a public vote. I mean, there are some things you work on where you have to work on a plan to get it right and then talk to the public about it. But by and large, by staying connected, by talking about the challenges confronting a community, a state or a school, you'll be in a better position to make good decisions. One of the things that I think is really useful in a cabinet government, and if you have ministers, it's also about collective decision making. So when you as a group of ministers are talking about your decisions, you should be able to convince the other ministers that what your decision is, or the plan that you're going to take, is a good plan. And that's one of the ways that you have in a South Australian government, for example, we have 14 ministers, and the big decisions are decisions that ministers don't necessarily just take by themselves, but share with their colleagues in the ministry. And it gives an opportunity for other colleagues to help make a plan better, or tell a minister if they think they've got a mistake, and help the plan to be as good as it can be. So collective decision making requires you to talk to the community and then convince your colleagues.
So in your ministry, like did you have a project that you led forward in that to persuade the other ministers to work on?
I think that It's an interesting question. There are a number. If I go back to before we were in government, a lot of the plans that we put in place in the last 2.5 years since we won the election were plans that we developed in opposition when I was Shadow Minister for Education. So, for example, when we were and the role works the same way. You develop your policies, you've got to convince your colleagues. So, when we confirmed that we wanted to move the Year 7s into high school. And worked out how we would do that and why we would do that, or when we decided we were going to have a phonics check for all of the Year 1 students in government schools so that to make sure that their early years reading was on track. Those sorts of policies were ones that came from speaking to many people, working with the experts and looking at other states and jurisdictions around the world to see what was working well. And then working out how would we do that in South Australia. And then I had to convince my colleagues, and since coming into government, working on how to implement that. And I think that for the most part it's going pretty well.
Have you travelled to see other education systems around the world? If so, what are some of the interesting things that you have learnt?
I haven't done an enormous amount of travel, but I have done some, and in particular interstate. We actually have an education ministerial council where all of the education ministers from around Australia meet about 3 or 4 times a year, and we've met in Adelaide, we've met in Melbourne, we've met in Alice Springs, although I wasn't able to be on that one. I was on the phone for that meeting. And so forth, and it travels around. So we look at what's happening in each different state and what we can learn from other states. I did travel to England at the beginning of this year to attend a conference which most education ministers, I know my predecessor also attended, called the World Education Forum. And I found that a really useful experience because we had representatives from, I think, about 100 countries and education ministers and senior education bureaucrats. And some of it was for big group sessions, hearing speeches, but a lot of it was smaller sessions. So, for example, I was able to present to about 50 or 60 people alongside a minister from Germany, and we had a representative from a non-government organisation supporting students who were refugees, and we had a really interesting discussion about the nature of how we support some of the most disadvantaged students in our schools from the different perspectives. I was able to meet with officials from Estonia, who are one of the fastest growing education systems in the world, and hear about some of the things they're doing. Interestingly, one of the things they credit their success to is rapidly improving the quality of internet in their schools so that they can use that in their pedagogy. And then they had to rapidly upskill the teachers, some of whom knew less about how to use the internet effectively than their students. And that's one of the things we're doing in South Australia right now. And look, there are great examples of things that are innovative around the world, but you've always got to remember that it has to work for our South Australian context. And it has to be respectful of our First Nations cultures and the Aboriginal people here in South Australia. And it has to understand the geography of South Australia, and knowing that some of our most disadvantaged students in regional and rural South Australia and remote South Australia are living in circumstances that hardly anyone else in the world is. And so you always got to work out how something can be useful for us before you just say, oh, that worked over there, let's do it.
So what advice about education would you give to young people who are in schools now?
I think that you should work hard. I know that just, I almost didn't say it because it sounds such a cliche. Everyone says work hard, but you know, there's nothing beats hard work, and people should give it your all. Find the things that you love doing and absolutely run at it and go hard at it. If I think about the time when I was your age and maybe even a little bit older, I think about times that were procrastinating, thinking about how I wish I had just spent a little bit more time, just even an extra 20 minutes per night doing some work, or at least reading books, or doing productive things rather than playing video games and things like that. I think that working hard, there's no substitute for it in the world.
So when you're growing up, who was the most influential adult you had?
Look, I've got to say my parents were the most influential. Probably my father was a very hard worker. He had a great work ethic, and I learnt a lot about how, even though he didn't have much education when he was growing up, he did everything that he did just through sheer application and effort and trying again. But probably my mum I spent much more time with. She had a love of books, and she taught me to read, even before I was at school, and she just had this constant reassuring that, if I'd tried something and failed, that, she was encouraging me to try again. And it was always a safe space talking to mum growing up, and that was really important in my development. So both of my parents in different ways, but, it's probably especially my mum.
We understand that you and your family have recently visited some iconic areas in Adelaide Hills. What were the highlights of Gamaraka, Birdwood and Mount Torrens trip?
Yeah, no, well, it's funny because, of course, we haven't been getting out much this year compared to usually, and when a lot of the tourist operations started reopening in the last month or so, we've got a 6 or 7. Oh, goodness me, she's nearly 2 months old now. A little baby at home, so we'd also been, very much at home because of her, and we've got a 2-year-old as well who absolutely loves animals. So the idea of the 4 of us getting out and about for a trip on a long weekend, was that when with a lot of the tourist operations were opening, so we thought, okay, well, let's go out and spend some money in the economy with some of these businesses that have really been struggling. And partly because, we like animals, but mostly because our 2-year-old utterly adores animals. It's the Rocking Horse at Gamaraka has a nice little nature park with some animals, but especially the Gorge Wildlife Park at Cuddly Creek. That was very popular, and I reckon she'd been through about 3 bags of pellets before we even got past the ducks, and then we got to the wallabies and the kangaroos and everything else, and she just went crazy.
I could just imagine
So-
doing that.
Yeah. So your two children, they love animals. Are you planning to go to the Adelaide Zoo when it's
Yeah, we're really happy to see that the zoo's reopened, and when our elder girl was born, we bought her a life membership to the zoo because we just thought what an extraordinary gift giving to a wildlife conservation charity, but also something that she'll be able to enjoy for her whole life. But I've got to say that it's really challenging when you've got a 2-year-old who sleeps from sort of 12:30 till 2 every day, and the baby who you just hope sleeps for these different naps.
Yes.
Going anywhere is an operation, and so you've got to plan ahead and make sure you've got enough time to do everything, and the zoo is one step too far for us at the moment, but we'll get there before the end of the year.
If you didn't enter a career in the politics, what would have been your dream job?
Look, I always enjoyed learning about history and learning about the different places that we all come from. And so I think that I would have loved to be a historian. There are probably fewer jobs for historians than there are for politicians. And it's a hard job to do. You've either got to be, teaching students in universities or maybe as a history teacher in schools. But the one that I really would have dreamed of would have been, writing about history and trying to write about the world and the way it was and bring it alive for people. But, that requires an enormous amount of academic research, and I went in a different direction.
So how did you start in the politics, and how was your journey into your current role?
Look, I'd always been interested in politics since I was pretty young. My family had a business, and it was a small business, and we talked about the impacts of government policy and tax and things like that, and at the dinner table, because everyone was pitching in. And so I'd always had politics at the back of my mind, and I went to uni and met some people who were interested in politics. I joined a political party and got involved in student elections, and I think that while I was doing some work in my family's business still back then, what I really wanted to do was have an influence on the way that our community works, and I thought I had something to offer. So I got involved in the volunteer organisation in the Liberal Party, and then about 12 or 13 years ago, I was in my late 20s, and I saw that there was the seat where I grew up, the area where I grew up, had been won by the Labor Party for the first time in many years, and I thought, I could have a go at that. And so I put my hand up to run as the Liberal candidate, and at the time the Liberal Party wasn't travelling as well, back in 2008, 2009, so I was the only person that put my hand up to run, and so I just knocked on hundreds and then thousands of doors saying, "Hi, my name's John. I'm the local Liberal candidate. Just really think that we can do better in our area. Can we have a chat?" And thousands of people were kind enough to have a chat to me, and then enough of them voted for me, and so here I am.
Is that able to give you confidence with like that one part of your life, like asking many people if you could be voted?
I got to say, it was terrifying to start with. The first house that I went to door knock, I was going to door knock this street. I'd picked it out. I can't remember why, but I remember driving there and parking, and I was like, okay, I had my clipboard, I had my little flyers, and I was going to get out of the car and knock on the door, and then I thought, okay, well, let's just listen to this music and calm down and listen to a song, and I was going to get out, and then I thought, no, I'll make a phone call. And I called somebody, and then I was going to get out, and I thought, you know what, I'm pretty hungry. I might go and get a coffee and a bun. So I did that. It took me about an hour to build up the courage to knock on my first door, because I was really thinking about how I was going to present myself, what I was there for. And what I realised was that the most important thing was being authentic, being myself. And even more important than that was it wasn't even about me, it was about them. So the best thing to do was just knock on the door and say who I was, John, Liberal candidate, and then ask what they wanted really, and what they wanted to know about, and what they thought we could do for our community. And most people, I think this is the thing that surprised me a little bit, most people were really happy to see somebody. They might have wanted to have a short talk to say, "No, I'm all good, mate, thanks." But they were polite, they were smiling, they were pleased that somebody had made the offer to see what they were on about, and that was great.
It's good.
So you're the son of English migrants. How did they end up to Australia?
Look, my dad came to Australia really young. His father had PTSD after the Second World War, and Dad was 6 years old in 1946, and so they tried a new life. They came to Australia. It didn't work. My grandfather was quite mentally struck still, so they moved back to England, and it wasn't working there. And then they came back to Australia again in 1956. It was difficult for them. It was harder for some people from non-English backgrounds at the time, but it was pretty difficult for them. And Dad had a difficult relationship with his family, so he left and joined the Navy as soon as he could. So 16, he joined the Navy, and then did a range of other jobs, but has been in Australia ever since. My mum was a nurse. She finished her training, and then she came out to Australia in the late 60s, and she was going to do a couple of years visiting some family and working on an Aboriginal community. And then she did another year on an Aboriginal community, and so she's working in Aboriginal community in the Northern Territory. She just fell in love with the country and never went home.
Minister Gardner, thank you for taking your time to talk with us. We understand how busy your schedule is, and it's been an honour having you here for our community podcast. Please continue your fantastic work in the community, and we'll be glad to have you back again soon.
Look, it's been a real joy to be here and meet you guys, and I can't wait to see the things you guys are going to achieve in the years ahead. This is a beautiful school, and I think that your families and your teachers would be really proud of the way that you're going. So congratulations.
Thank you.